Hello, this is Patrick Barnard in Montreal. It is May 2nd, 2025. This is the 14th International Press Review, and today we're going to talk about a few topics in a sort of personal way, too. That's Quebec, Canada, a very important article on Palestine that appeared in Harper's. But first, we're going to talk about the Canada story. Today, Prime Minister Mark Carney held his first press conference in Ottawa, and here's a small section of it in which he says that his aim is not to be big, but to do big.
Since day one of my leadership campaign in January, I'm in politics to do big things, not to be something. And now that Canadians have honored me with a mandate to bring about big changes quickly, I will work relentlessly to fulfill that trust. As I stressed on election night, I am committed to working with others, governing as a team in cabinet and caucus, and working constructively across parties in Parliament.
Mark Carney has a strong minority government now in Canada. He produced a very surprising defeat of Pierre Poilievre, who really was the chosen conservative candidate of the Trump people in Washington. But Mr. Carney is Prime Minister. He's also a man with a very formidable background. He was twice Governor of the Bank of England, once Governor of the Bank of Canada, the only foreigner asked ever to head the Bank of England. He's very well known to financial circles in Europe, in Canada, and in the UK. Now, in that press conference this Friday, Carney laid out an agenda for Canada. He didn't use the word industrial policy, but that, in fact, is what he's going to try to do. There are tariffs brought against this country by the United States and a very aggressive messaging by Trump, and there are counter tariffs that Canada has levied on the Americans.
America wants our land, our resources, our water, our country. These are not idle threats. President Trump is trying to break us so that America can own us. That will never, ever happen. Our old relationship with the United States, a relationship based on steadily increasing integration, is over. The system of open global trade, anchored by the United States, a system that Canada has relied on since the Second World War, a system that, while not perfect, has helped deliver prosperity for a country for decades, is over. These are tragedies, but it's also our new reality. We are over the shock of the American betrayal, but we should never forget the lessons.
In his Friday press conference, Prime Minister Carney made serious promises, and at the very time he was talking, there was an announcement by General Motors of Canada that more than 700 workers were going to be laid off on a shift in the Oshawa, Ontario plant. Those people have very well-paying jobs. Now, there's a tit-for-tat going on. American tariffs, Canadian counter-tariffs. Carney is promising to use the income from the counter-tariffs to support workers such as the ones at General Motors in Oshawa. Similarly, the lumber industry in British Columbia is being threatened with tariffs. They sell a huge amount of lumber to the United States. If they're not able to do so, that lumber will be used in a national housing policy that Carney says his government is going to bring about. So Carney is going to increase shipbuilding, defend the North, increase defense expenditures, and use all the levers he possibly can to redirect the structure of the Canadian economy. Mark Carney's press conference this Friday, May 2nd, in Ottawa was very impressive. It was short. There was a lot in it. It was concise. It was impressive, as I said. And Canadian journalists felt that. They were surprised to see how dexterous politically Carney can be. Now, interestingly and ironically, journalists in the United Kingdom probably know Mark Carney better than people do here. Why? Because he was governor of the Bank of England during the Brexit crisis. And let's take a look at the op-ed page of the Financial Times of London on Wednesday, April 30th. There's a lead column by Edward Luce called Carney is Democracy's Un-Trump. Now, Edward Luce, who's based in the United States for the Financial Times, says, in a spirit of full disclosure, that he has known Mark Carney for 30 years. And there's an interesting phrase here, quote, "If globalism had a name and a face, it would be Carney's," close quote. Luce says something very clear, and it's appreciated by a lot of people outside of Canada and the United States. Quote, "By coveting Canada's sovereignty, Trump turned the semi-Trumpian Conservative Party's projected landslide into defeat in the space of weeks." The journalists at the Financial Times do not like Donald Trump's presidency because they believe Trump is a danger to the whole economic system in the world. They do like Carney because they know him and he represents a different approach to economics. Down below Edward Luce's column is a column by another Trump critic, Martin Wolf, who's a very, very well-known financial journalist. The title of his piece is "Why the U.S. Will Lose Against China. Trump's Unreliable America is Throwing Away the Assets it Needs to Maintain its Global Status." And I was struck by a middle paragraph here, which I'm going to read out to you, at least in part. "Above all," writes Martin Wolf, quote, "the U.S. has become unreliable. A transactional U.S. is one always seeking a better deal. No sane country should bet its future on such a partner, especially against China. Trump's treatment of Canada was the defining moment. The Canadians have responded by re-electing the Liberals. Trump's aggressiveness towards Canada, helping elect Mark Carney as Canada's Prime Minister, is yet again an example of the unintended consequences Trumpism produces. This coming week on Tuesday, Mr. Carney will be going to Washington to meet Mr. Trump, and then a little later this month, King Charles III of Great Britain will be opening the Canadian Parliament. It's not talked about a great deal, but the monarch of the United Kingdom is actually the head of state of Canada. And Mark Carney knows King Charles. He asked him to come here to open the Parliament, and Charles very readily agreed. I think it's a clever move because it's an assertion of sovereignty in the face of Trump's bombastic aggression. And I was surprised because I read Le Devoir. It's a paper I've read for ages. It's a nationalist paper here in Quebec. And I was surprised how very fair the coverage was, including even the coverage of the royal visit, because a lot of Quebecers don't like the monarchy, and yet they know that it's part of the scene here. The parliamentary reporter for Le Devoir in Ottawa pointed out that the Friday press conference went at a speed that Ottawa journalists, he said, were not really used to, with all sorts of objectives and plans coming forward at that rather short press conference. The very good economics correspondent of the Le Devoir, a man called Éric Desrosiers, pointed out that it's going to be difficult for Mark Carney to meet all his objectives and bring it all together. And I think actually that is quite true. It's going to be an interesting May. Update. It is now Monday, May 5th, and Trump has been sounding off with more annexation talk. Honestly, it seems absurd, except it is not. And I heard on CBC Radio this morning the local union leader at the Oshawa plant where the layoffs took place, and honestly, he sounded a bit lost and said it was all resting on Prime Minister Carney's shoulders. And Carney will be meeting for the first time, a series of meetings really, with Trump in Washington tomorrow. So everyone has got to wish good luck to him. Ironically, this past weekend, Anthony Albanese was re-elected as Prime Minister of Australia, another Commonwealth country. And that's a further example of the Trump factor, bringing to power a center-left figure, not what the Trumpies expected. Now, that's a sign that the world goes on, and it goes on in a very tragic and terrible way in Palestine. And I want to end this International Press Review by talking about the essay that Ben Ehrenreich has published in Harper's, and it's all about the West Bank. Ben Ehrenreich is a writer of fiction as well as a reporter, and in his Harper's essay, War in the West Bank, he describes a place that he lived in at one time, that he's reported about, that he's written about, and the tragedy that he describes is the one endured by Palestinians who have their land, their houses, taken away from them by members of the Israeli Defense Force, by settlers, by policemen. It's a terrible process, one that you can see in that Oscar-winning film, No Other Land. Here's a short clip from that.
Telephone?
In the essay, Ehrenreich visits cities, villages, towns where he's known people who engaged for a long time in non-violent struggle at a terrible cost of people being killed and wounded. And now there's an awful silence in those places. And he gives a vivid picture of this. And among the young men, a new fatalism and a decision really that the only road for them is armed struggle. This is how he puts it. The young men had seen enough to believe that they would be killed whether they fought or not. So they started asking themselves, why wait for them to kill us? This is Patrick Barnard with the International Press Review.